Servant of the Lord, Gloria Trevino Flores from G. Trevino Flores Ministry sing every Saturday from 6 to 8. I will be here with the help of the Lord. Please get in touch with us. Telephone number 727-441-3000. And you can write to us, Gloria Trevino Flores Ministries Inc. to P.O. Box 5221, Clearwater, Florida 33758. Your donations, prayers number one. Then your financial support will be welcome.
Never give up on your dreams starts Saturday night, 6 to 8 here on Tan Talk.
Prescription Addiction Radio Show, Breaking the Silence. New time, 5 to 7. Drive time, Tuesdays. I am Larry G. Along with Montana, we talk about the topics nobody else is talking about. OxyContin, Vicodin, Xanax, Prozac, Lexapro, Seroquel, Cymbalta, heroin, and even marijuana. You don't know about drugs until you listen to the Prescription Addiction Radio Show. Brought to you by Novus Medical Detox and Suncoast Rehabilitation. Tuesday nights, 5 to 7.
From the Sunshine State, this is Tampa Bay's Tan Talk.
It's now time for the fastest and hardest hitting hour in radio, Pull No Punches Radio. Pull No Punches Radio is powered by the Enlisted Nine Fight Company and brought to you exclusively by the Tan Talk Radio Network. Join UFC legend Chris Lights Out Lytle, Enlisted Nine Fight Company founder Dan O'Brien, and media mogul Jay Pagliaro, along with recurring guest Colton Smith for the next hour as we deliver up-to-the-second news, rumors, and discussions from the world of mixed martial arts and sports. And now, here are your hosts, Chris, Dan, and Jay.
I wish I knew then what I know right now. When my parents split, that's when it shook my ground. No source of strength now, my life was unclear. Cracks in the foundation, I was living in fear. Paycheck to paycheck, 3 jobs at a time.
Good morning, Tampa Bay, and welcome to the fastest and hardest hitting hour on the radio airways, Pull No Punches Radio. Pull No Punches Radio, again, as always, is sponsored by and powered by the Enlisted Nine Fight Company, and we're glad to be here on the Tan Talk Radio Network. Jay Pagliaro, Chris Lights Out Lytle, Dan O'Brien with you for the next hour. And so we've got a lot of discussions here going on in the world of mixed martial arts and sports. Obviously, Super Bowl set, we're going to talk about a little bit about some of the storylines. We're not going to get too much in-depth and information about what that, because we're going to save that for next week's show. But one topic I know we're going to discuss is the games that happened. We're going to discuss the Richard Sherman paradox. We're going to give some of our Super Bowl storylines to look out for. We got the retirement of an Ultimate Fighter original. We've got, just a bevy of topics to discuss. Real quick, we're just going to talk this real quick, and I didn't have this on the script, but the Buccaneers, in case you guys haven't noticed yet or didn't hear the news, they hired Jason Licht to be their new general manager. We'll break that down here in a little bit, probably on the next broadcast, of what Licht will bring to the table as a GM and what his strengths and weaknesses are. So big news there from the Buccaneers. But anybody that does want to be part of the program, your telephone number to call, give us a call now at 727-441-3000 or 866-826-1340. Without any further ado, let me go ahead and introduce my co-host today. First and foremost, the one and only Chris Lights Out Lytle. Chris, how you doing this week, my friend?
Doing fantastic, my friend. Doing good.
Good to have you back on the air. And also, of course, we got the man who started it all when it comes to Enlisted Nine Fight Company. See what, man, if this guy, I swear, he's been in touch with everybody. If there's somebody out there in the sports world, this guy is from Hulk Hogan all the way on down the line to Andrew DeClercq, even us, even my lowly peon behind, my good friend Dan O'Brien. Dan, good morning.
How you guys doing today? Good to have you.
Good to have you back here, brother. Well, hey, let's kick off the festivities right off the bat. We'll start off by talking about the retirement of Chris the Crippler Lieben, Ultimate Fighter 1 original. This guy, you know what I mean, if there was an exciting fight for him to be in, it must be something about fighters named Chris in the UFC, Mr. Lytle, because, I mean, it's you guys, Lytle is another one like you who brought everything to the table. Well, I'll start with you with this one. Did you ever have any dealings with Mr. Lytle, and what were your thoughts on his career as a whole, and what's his ultimate lasting legacy?
Well, I actually am Mr. Lytle. You mean, do I have any with Mr. Lieben? Yeah, I've been on the same card as him many times. The thing I kind of didn't like being on the call with him sometimes because I always knew that it was going to be a run for my money who was going to win the fight of the night bonus or the knockout of the night bonus. He was always going to be there. The thing about him, I think his legacy is he was kind of a fighter's fighter. He was just a hard-nosed, kind of roughy and a tough guy. Chris Lieben was always in the fight. You never knew if he was going to knock the guy out the last second or if he was just going to take a beating. It was always going to be an entertaining fight. You couldn't get up and go to the other room because something might happen. Heavy-handed, very good chin, tough guy. I really looked at some of his fights. One of my favorites was when he fought Terry Martin. I don't know if you remember that fight, but Terry Martin was a guy from Chicago, had a bunch of bullet holes and stab wounds, and just a tough guy, just kind of a guy who'd been around the block a few times. And they got into a great fight. Terry Martin was a very heavy-handed guy. He hit Lieben several times, and right when it looked like he was going to get knocked out in the third round, time running out, it was a left hook and knocked Terry Martin out cold. So that was just one of those fights where, like, he just looked like he was going to get knocked out, came back and knocked the other guy out. It was very entertaining fight. He had a lot of good ones. I also know just different times winning by submission in the third round. Just a lot of times when you didn't know if he was going to win, he pulled out the victory. The guy ended up with 6 bonuses, like I said, 5 of the night, knock of the night, submission, whatnot. So anytime you're getting over 2 or 3 bonuses, that means you're a very highly excitable fighter.
Absolutely. And, Dan, I'm going to kick to you here real quick, but I'm glad you brought up the Terry Martin fight because that epitomized Chris Lieben. I'm going to throw another one out there, another 2, and I'm training at his gym. He's my strength. I'm working with him to lose weight, so he's going to kick my rear end for mentioning this. And he's probably listening to this, so I'm going to be doing burpees until I vomit on Monday now. But I got to mention the Aaron Simpson fight. I mean, where Aaron was another case, dominating him in the wrestling mat, was really having his way with him. And then, Lieben winds up coming from behind and picking up the win. I'm sorry, Aaron, you're my boy, but I got to give Chris his due diligence. And also, just a week later, gentlemen, it's not even 7 days against Akiyama. I mean, that to me was what Chris Lieben and the Terry Martin fight. I mean, another one. Terry Martin, people may not remember the name. This is a guy, though, I mean, he knocked out Jorge Rivera, knocked him flush. He beat Ivan Salivary. This guy was generating some buzz as a legitimate contender and a possible titleist against, possible contender to fight Anderson Silva, and was well on his way to that. And I don't want to say Lieben derailed that hype, derailed his career, but I mean, that's a case in point. That guy would not quit. And, I got my other thoughts on Lieben, but I want to give Dan your due diligence on this. Dan, what were your thoughts on Lieben as a whole?
I think Chris Lieben, I think his legacy will always be, and, he always brought it, and he never quit. And the thing that was funny about him, and I think Chris just touched on it, you could never leave because it was so exciting. Because there were many a times Chris Lieben was in so much trouble in the octagon, and somehow he was able to, work through it and still come out with some decisive victories. And I think Chris Lieben, in some ways, unfortunately, I don't necessarily think that he was the most athletic fighter. I just think that his heart, his, ability to work through things, especially with the division as thick as it was at that time, I think he just was able to, train and do things to his strengths. And I think that he had an outstanding career. And actually, I think for the majority of the fans, he's going to be sorely missed because he was very exciting.
Well, and to add to what you're saying there, that's no, a shot at him or anything. He will really admit that. If you look at some of his interviews as he was retiring, he would say, I was not the most athletic guy, and I wasn't the fastest. I wasn't the strongest. But he was like, I was a tough guy who had a lot of heart, and that's kind of what he built his career on. So you saying that, that's exactly Chris's words out of his own mouth. So what you're saying is right on there. He'll say he wasn't the most athletic guy, but, he made up for it in other categories.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Chris is you guys are both hit the nail right on the head. Here's a guy who I like to call him the yeoman's fighter. And, Chris, you may know what I'm talking about here when I say that. Gentlemen who they work hard, they get in there, they leave it all in the octagon, and they overcome adversity. Look, I'll use, Lieben to me, let's remember what he did on The Ultimate Fighter Season 1. I mean, and that's the one thing I want to bring up about him that's another legacy is, I'll call this crazy, and people may think I'm nuts for saying this, but I think Chris Lieben is as much responsible for how popular Tough 1 in the UFC became as anything, because let's be honest, Chris didn't exactly have the nicest of light shown on him in the house between, urinating on Jason Thacker's bed, which for those of you that don't remember Jason Thacker, he was more or less, I hate to say this about the kid, but he was probably the most in-over-his-head fighter I've ever seen on that competition, and that says a lot. I mean, and he was basically a target of many Chris Lieben's drunk pranks. So, between that and the feud with Southworth and Koscheck, I mean, being honest, Chris, I mean, Dan, let's be honest, people thrive on that, and we'll talk about this with Richard Sherman in a little bit, but people thrive on that controversy. People were tuning in to just as much to see Chris Lieben and whose bet he was going to piss in next or whose fight he was going to get in with next as much as they were the fights itself. So I want to say Chris Lieben really, a big key as to what led to the growth of the UFC and the explosion in popularity just because of his antics. And you look at what he did after that, though. I mean, he left the house a troublemaker, the goal that for years before Junie Browning came along, he was a guy that nobody wanted to be. He put that to bed, though, with 22 fights in the UFC, and not a single one of them were really what you could call boring. But, Dan, Chris, what do you guys think of that?
Well, I mean, I agree. And it's very interesting when you have that dynamic that happens. It seems like lots of times people have learned that sometimes people want to pay to see people win, and sometimes they want to see people lose. Sometimes people are not liked. And I remember my friend Matt Mitrione, he was on the reality show as well, and he became that guy. And it was funny talking to him. I was like, Matt, well, what's going on? And he was like, I don't even want to watch this show, Chris. I don't want to watch it. I didn't know it was going to end up like this. And, it bothered him. And I told him afterwards, I was like, hey, you have a clean slate right now. You're going to have to go out there and prove to people what kind of person you are. And when he first went out and fought UFC, people would boo him. And now he goes there and they cheer him. And I think Chris Lieben was the same way. Unfortunately, right at the beginning, people don't understand what it's like to be on that reality show. You have no TV, no radio, no contact with the outside world for weeks, and you're just on that show, and you got to think that you're going to take something from what I might do in a 5-day period, and you're going to take 30 or 40 seconds of that and put it on TV. You might make me look bad. So all that happens, and I think, Chris was in that role, and he did just what my friend Matt did, and he made people like him afterwards, and I think that's a great thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, I mean, Dan, you could vouch for this with Colton. I mean, with even now there's still some people, and there's still people that will talk about Lieben urinating in Thacker's bed. There are still people that will talk about the infamous fake glove touch between Colton and Jesse Barrett, in the opening part of the prelim fights on The Ultimate Fighter. I mean, everything I think Chris said spot on is they take 40 seconds, of a 24-hour-a-day taping, and you can use it to manipulate them. And I mean, would you say that Lieben was victim of that as well?
I think, you mean Colton, or are you talking about Lieben?
Both of them.
Yeah, I think when you look at it, you're in the house, like Chris said. You're basically confined to all those people. You're not really in your natural mindset. You're out of your elements, and I think that they have to capture, and it's good TV. And I think, like Chris Lieben, I think he had to show the public and other fighters that were in the UFC at the time when he came in there that wasn't his personality. But there's nothing wrong with a little prankster, kind of stuff going on. And Colton, a good example of him. If you look on, it's been a year now since the glove touch, and other than you just bringing it up now, we've done a really good job, getting ourselves out there and showing people that that's not what Colton's all about. But, when you get into the moment and you have to basically survive, I guess, or try to fight your way into the house, sometimes you do things that may be out of character. But at the bottom, I think the end result is, though, Colton now is looked upon as a very professional fighter now that people are seeing him in the public eye, and they have seen his last 2 fights, even though they were losses. He's more than made up for that. And, I don't think that that's even an issue anymore. And I think talking about Matt Mitrione, same thing. When you watch that show and then you actually talk to Matt, totally opposite people, and I don't even think Matt was bad on the show at all. I think he was evolving into a fighter, and he was trying to find his place. It's kind of different when you were in say the NFL. I mean, people probably do things differently there. He gets put in the national scene, and I don't know that he was prepared for that or, whatever. But I think he did a great job on the show. And I think now when you watch Matt, you meet him in person, he's like a really awesome dude. So, I just think that it's about TV and it's about selling, that market. And when you actually meet these guys, I think they're totally different people for the most part.
Now, I'm going to use that as a segue to move on to our next topic because you brought up a good balance point here. We'll talk a little bit about the NFC Championship game. Obviously, that game, we'll talk about the results here in a moment, but masked by the antics of Richard Sherman at the end of the game. Now, for those of you that didn't see the game or post-game theatrics, about a minute left in the game, San Francisco going on their final drive, trying to tie or possibly win the game with a 2-point conversion. There's a pass play thrown into the end zone. It's a one-on-one matchup between Richard Sherman and Michael Crabtree. We see, Sherman break it up. Seattle gets the ball. They retain, get possession back to close out the game and then win in another trip to the Super Bowl. After the play happens, you see Richard Sherman go up and pat Crabtree on the butt, and then Crabtree push him away. What really got the controversy started with Richard Sherman, though, is his post-game antics in his post-game interview with Aaron Andrews. And Andrews was asking him a question, and all of a sudden Sherman goes off on, dare I say, an epic rant. And, he's become must-see TV, and the guy's got a lot of negative feedback as a result of it. We've heard him referred to many, many terms, some not so pleasant. One that I don't want to mention on air because of, he went on record and said that word which begins with the letter T is used in a derogatory term. But point I'm making here, though, is Richard Sherman, let me ask you guys this. I mean, this is a guy who's a Stanford graduate. He's a guy who, quite frankly, one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL. But before this, him and the Seahawks weren't that well known. I mean, they were known in the Pacific Northwest and here on the West Coast circles. But dare I say, is Richard Sherman really a bad guy, or is he the victim of TV editing? Is there more to meet the eye? Or is this guy a marketing genius? Because let's be honest, in the last week, he's become the third highest jersey seller in the NFL. I mean, what's the Richard Sherman paradox here? Is he a bad dude, or is he smart as hell? I mean, is he a genius?
I think they don't get a lot of TV time. He had an outstanding play. It was a lot of that reaction was off of emotion. I don't think he appreciated getting snubbed at the end of the game there. When you saw the replay, you could hear what was said. Richard Sherman said, "Hey, great game to Crabtree." Crabtree wasn't having it. So at that point, I think with the emotion, and then that just shifted into that. I don't know that Sherman thought that he was going to become a national icon, whether good or bad. But the bottom line is you haven't seen Peyton Manning on TV all week, but you've seen Sherman about 16 to 20 times every time you turn on Fox. He's on Greta, he's on Hannity. And I'll tell you, whether he meant to do it or not, he's a marketing genius right now. And whether people want to see him win or lose, the bottom line is people are going to see him, next week. And they're going to tune in, whether they want Peyton Manning to shred him apart or just the opposite. He's relevant now, and he did a great job for his team because Seattle's getting a whole lot of public visibility that they usually don't.
Absolutely. Chris, what are your thoughts on Richard Sherman's antics? I mean, do you think the guy is do you think he's this marketing genius, or do you think that he's perhaps a bad influence?
Well, I think he's just kind of very fortunate. Do I think he did that on purpose and knew that would be a great thing? Absolutely not. Has it turned into it? Absolutely. Yet, the proof is his jersey sales are going up like they are. All that being said, I don't think people can really appreciate one's adrenaline that takes over after a big play like that, a big point in the game. I know I've had fights where after I won, they interviewed me, and it's almost like I'm looking at myself from outside my body, and I'm thinking, what is this guy saying? He sounds like an idiot. I'm like, that's me talking. I'm actually doing it, and I don't even remember what I'm saying until I watch the interview the next day. So sometimes when your adrenaline's that high and you're in a euphoric state, things are just coming out, and you don't even really know what you're saying. So I imagine that's what's happening with this guy at the time. Sherman, I've looked into his background a little bit, talked to some of the people that his friends will be talking. They're saying he's always been like that. For playing video games, he's acting the same way. He is fired up. I mean, at first I thought the same thing as a lot of other people. This guy looks like, like a punk or whatever you want to say. He's a Stanford grad. He was a salutatorian of his high school in California. Very intelligent guy. I did not know this myself. Very intelligent. Not a bad person at all. I think his emotion got the better of him. He went on his little rant, and it's working out for him. So good for him. I'm glad to see he's going to get some good respect and get some notoriety that he deserves.
Absolutely. I mean, the jersey sales, Dan brought it up, the ratings in the Super Bowl. I think that, to be honest with you, this is probably the best thing that could have happened was for the NFL was Richard Sherman's post-game rant because, being perfectly honest, you got Denver you've got Seattle. You've got one team that is the northernmost team in the National Football League when it comes to the West. They're the northwest most located team. I mean, they're not a big media hut. I mean, Seattle is a big city. I mean, they're not Tippecanoe, Iowa, but at the same time, they're not a big media destination. I mean, people don't rush to Seattle to say, hey, what's the latest happenings in Seattle like they do some of the other markets like Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., Miami, et cetera. But, Denver's the same way. I mean, Denver's the same way. And being perfectly honest, if you look at the last Super Bowl, the Seahawks win all the way back in 2006, ratings-wise, it was one of the lowest Super Bowls of all time. I can sincerely guarantee you this one is going to be pretty hot. This Super Bowl is going to have high ratings, and I can't help but believe that Richard Sherman's antics last week at the end of the game, whether that be, the adrenaline that you were talking about, Chris, which I'm certainly going to chalk it up as that, or Richard Sherman playing a role, I mean, people are going to tune in. Like Dan said, I've already heard people that have commented, I hope Peyton Manning torches him for 7 touchdowns. I mean, people are rooting against Seattle now because of Richard Sherman. They're going to tune in to watch. And P.T. Barnum once said it best, there's no such thing as bad publicity. This guy got the Seahawks, Dan, a whole hell of a lot.
Oh, and the thing about it, it's unfortunate for the other 10 players on each side of the ball, but now it's become a Peyton Manning, Richard Sherman duo. And that's good for the NFL, like you said, because everybody wants to play that good guy, bad guy role, and I think Richard Sherman has no problem with that. But one other point I had, he had the opportunity to, get in front of the media, made a great play. But is he really any different than the guys before that are corners? Sometimes corners feel like they're left out. And remember how Deion, he made a huge marketing, deal with himself when he used to sell himself. So I don't think this is I don't think it's anything new. It's just for a while we just haven't seen that dominant cornerback in there being able to shut people down like this guy does. And he got the opportunity to get his name out there. So good or bad, I think it makes for an exciting game here next week.
Absolutely. They're certainly looking forward to that. Now, we'll get to some of the other storylines. We mentioned one, Sherman versus Manning, the Sherman paradox in a moment. We'll mention some of the other ones in a moment here, but we do diligence if we didn't talk about the games themselves. Obviously, we just talked a little bit about the 49ers Seahawks game. That one, 23-17, Seattle wins. They come from behind to win this one. The big stories in this one, outside of Sherman's antics, were, the fact that, Seattle took 2 very calculated gambles, Chris, on 4th down. One paid off, one didn't. But Seattle ultimately, I can't help but believe if they don't go for that play on 4th down and convert on it and score the touchdown, they don't win this game, in my opinion. And I know that's hearsay, tied the game up, blah, blah, blah. But, I mean, that's a big risk, and there's such a thing as momentum. You can trade for this, one-time punch, can be the difference between a 3-round loss and a knockout win. Was that conversion on 4th down the Hail Mary punch, so to speak, that the Seahawks needed and ultimately propelled them to the win?
I mean, I don't think it was a Hail Mary punch at all, but I think it was pivotal to them winning the game. Once again, football is all about momentum, so it really, they can feed on that. And at the point in the game, it was pivotal. Like you said, they went for it twice. The last time, I don't even think they deserved to have the ball, and I think there has to be something done about the replay system when they kept showing the 49ers' knee get bent in half, and he was laying down on the ground with the ball, and they give it right back to Seattle. I didn't understand how that could possibly happen, and they went for a 4th down, didn't get it, which I was glad because I didn't think that they deserved to have the ball anyway. But, the momentum was still in their favor, and then, Kaepernick has 3 turnovers in the 4th quarter. That's momentum. That's changing. I mean, 49ers were up to a 10-0 lead at the beginning of the game, but the momentum switch, it's very difficult to stop that.
Dan, I mean, with that momentum switch, what do you think really the biggest key to Seattle's win here was to get that momentum back and ultimately steal the win?
I think the play that was the offsides play when it was like 4th and 29 or whatever, and they scored that touchdown when they had the free play. I think when you saw the reaction on the sideline with Jim Harbaugh, you saw everything. You would have thought that pass, and if you look at the defender, it just like literally went right underneath his hand, like within an inch. I think when that play happened right there, I think that the 49ers, even though they did draw it back at the end of the game, I think that that was the nail in the coffin for me.
mean, that was a calculated gamble, and it's one that paid off. I mean, the one, like Chris, you were talking about the fourth down where they right inside the goal line, and they were trying to essentially punch San Francisco in the mouth, for lack of a better term. That would have been a chip shot field goal. They decided to go for it. Sort of right justifying the wrong, right? That's the one we're talking about at the end of the game where instead of going for the Hashik field goal, they went for it on first and goal or on fourth and goal.
Correct.
That was. So I mean, those are two of the more calculated gambles I've seen. And hey, momentum works. Momentum's a big thing. But just a quick stat here about this game with the win. Colin Kaepernick is now, with the loss, I should say. Colin Kaepernick now is 0-3 in his career in the city of Seattle. Has yet to win a game in Seattle. Jim Harbaugh, on the record, 0-3 since 2012. He's just 1-3 overall. So there's something about maybe Seattle having San Francisco's number when it comes to being in games in the Pacific Northwest. And the other game of the afternoon, the one that sort of been bumped to the back burner a little bit with all the Richard Turman discussions, Denver advances to the Super Bowl. They beat the Patriots 26-16. Dan, I'll kick off with you here. What was the turning point in this game for Denver? What did Denver do right? What did New England do wrong?
I think that Denver, they just had a wonderful game plan. I think Peyton Manning was able to exploit them in all the areas that they didn't think that he would be able to. And I think, but my biggest thing was when Wes Welker took out Talib. I think that totally shifted the whole game. People will argue with me, but if you look at when he didn't mean to take him out, they were running like a sluggo route, and Welker just happened to clip him. And when Talib went out of the game, it just looked like the air went out of the entire Patriots team because they knew he was their best corner. And after that, if you notice, the Thompsons, they started getting hot. I mean, Decker, all those guys. I mean, it seemed like everywhere Peyton threw the ball, somebody was open because that one individual, a lot of guys say it's not one guy that makes up a team, but the continuity of that one guy and what he brings, the motivation and the ability to put the defense in the right areas, I think when he walked off the field, that was a major blow to the New England Patriots.
Chris, what was your rundown of the game? What are your assessments on how New England was unable to capitalize and how was Denver able to capitalize? What was your thoughts in the whole on the game?
Well, I thought the momentum change probably happened right at the opening kickoff. I don't think New England was ever really had the right game plan or was in the game. I know from being a Peyton Manning fan for many years, being in Indianapolis, the one thing you can do to interrupt Peyton Manning is you can either pressure him and try and get to him and knock him down, or you can play bump and run on his receivers and knock them off their pattern. They did none of that. Manning was sacked 0 times for the game. He was knocked down 0 times for the game. And I understand if you're not trying to bring a lot of pass rush or the offensive line is doing great, then you're going to have to change up and try and get those receivers off their mark right from the beginning because Peyton Manning is all about timing. They did none of that. Every time he threw the ball, there was a guy open every time, and it was just a timing pattern. So I don't understand why New England didn't try something different. They know how he plays. I mean, both of the lines, offensive and defense, in my opinion, were dominated by Denver. Blunt the week before, who ran all over the Colts, had 4 touchdowns. This guy has 6 yards. I mean, there was just absolutely nothing they could do when their game plan was what it was. They were not going to win that game.
I got to throw this question out to you, gentlemen. And with that being said, I mean, New England this year, we'll call it as it is, one of the less dominant performances. This wasn't the Patriot team you're used to seeing, and you could use a lot of reasons, the depleted receiving core, what have you. But I can't help but wonder, is this the end of the line for the Patriots being the dominant team in the NFL? And you look on paper, Tom Brady's not getting any younger. He's going to be 37 next year. I mean, it's not as though he had a crappy 2013 by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, he did throw for over 4,000 yards. He had 25 touchdowns. But, again, I mean, how much Father Time catches up to even the best of them. And, I mean, the Patriots this year really feasted on a weak division and didn't even look that dominant doing so. So have we seen the last, Chris, of the Patriots as that team, so to speak?
You know what? Once again, coming as an Indianapolis Colts fan and somebody who has that's been their main adversity over the past 10 years, you know, I hope so. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm tired of seeing them beat us every time in the playoffs and whatnot. So I hope so, but I don't know. It seems like every time I think they're in a bad position, they're not going to be able to put it together, they always seem to find a way to win. I'm not pretty sure if this is going to be the end for them. The only thing that could make that happen is if what you're saying, Tom Brady being 37, if he's unable to continue to play at that level, then I think that will be a difference maker. But if he's still able to get it done for a couple of years, I think that they can bounce right back next year.
They could. They very well could. I think it all depends on number 12. It's made as that team is made or broken by number 12. And the reason LeGarrette Blount, I think, was able to run so adequately on the Colts isn't because of a career resurgence. It's because, simple fact, the Colts were prepared for Tom Brady to throw all down. And, you know, as long as he's able to do that, they're still competitive. If not, and I'm going to tell you this right now, there's a package deal going on with him and Brady. Mark my words on this. Bill Belichick's not going to want to stick around for a reclamation project. Not at this point in the game. So when Brady goes, Belichick goes. And, you know, the Patriots, I think, go with them. But whether that's next year and we start to see slippage and decline, time will tell. I know we're starting to see it now because even if you look at this team versus last year's and the previous year, you know, when they went to the Super Bowl, again, yeah, they made the AFC Championship game, but not quite the same team that we're used to seeing. Dan, what do you think? What do you think of the Patriots? You think they got any gas left in the tank, or do you think that this was their last hurrah, so to speak?
You know, I will tell you that I think New England Patriots are probably the best at playing team ball. And when they go off in the off season, they'll do some free agency. You know, they'll do some evaluation. They'll build a team. Because what a lot of people seem to think with the Patriots is that, yeah, this could be the end of the road. But just think about this, though. You got a Pittsburgh team that's not so hot right now. You got the Jets that have fallen off. The Ravens have fallen off. You got the Chargers that are getting old over there with Rivers. You got an old team in Denver, you know, as far as a Peyton Manning. Young team, but as far as their quarterback, their skipper. So I think New England's fine. I think the team, to be honest with you, that if they could just get to the next level, is going to be your guys right there in Chris's neighborhood with Cincinnati and, the Colts, the Indianapolis Colts. Those are the two teams that I think right now are the best in the best situation to possibly move past the other teams. They're playing real good ball right now. They haven't been able to get over the hump. But I think the Indianapolis Colts and I think Cincinnati Bengals, if they can recover from what just happened to them in the playoffs, I think those are the two teams in the next year, maybe 2 years, that pretty much say, you know, it's over for pretty much all those other teams as they've been getting older. Those two teams that seem to be having a very good resurgence, and I think that those are the two teams probably either next year or the year after will take over the AFC.
I think those, and I'm going to throw another two on there on top of that list. One is the Houston Texans, and I know that's really almost asinine to say considering they have the number one pick in the draft, but really I think Houston is a quarterback away from doing some special stuff. This is a team that won 12 games each of the last 2 seasons prior to 2013. Wound up going to the playoffs. You know, I mean, they, along with Indianapolis, you know, they play in a pretty patty cake division. You know, they got Indianapolis ahead of them, who I think is going to be that good. But really, Jacksonville and Tennessee are a long ways away from getting back there, if they ever get back there. So, I mean, I think Houston, if they draft Ted Bridgewater or Johnny Manziel, could be right back in the fray. And I think Bill O'Brien will do some very, very good things for him. Another one, I think, is the Miami Dolphins. If they can ever get this ownership, this GM situation, this nonsensical power struggle that they have up down there in South Florida with Donna Ponte and in tow, if they can get that fixed and get the right people in there, that team has the talent to do a lot. But, again, seeing and doing, two different animals. Speaking of seeing and doing, of course, we mentioned the Super Bowl coming up here next Sunday. The old AFC West rivalry will be back. I'm harkening back to days of John Elway and David Craig. Kurt Warner, and no, I'm not talking to the quarterback that played for the Cardinals and the Rams. I'm talking to the old running back from Penn State who played for the Seahawks, Steve Largent. You know, we're harkening back to those days, and that'll be taking place next Sunday in New York City, Super Bowl 48. Some storylines to take a look at in this game. Chris, we'll lead off with you. What's, to you, the number one storyline in this game that people should tune in to watch for?
I think the number one storyline to me is you're going to have a rare occasion where you have the number one defense in Seattle versus the number one offense in Denver. This year, Seattle's defense gave up in the regular season about 14.5 points a game and about 274 yards. That's phenomenal for defense. They had 39 turnovers. That was great, 28 interceptions. Denver, on the other hand, they scored 606 points this year. It was fantastic. I mean, just a scoring fest at all times. They averaged 457 yards per game. That's a huge number to be putting out there every week. So usually when you have a game like this, usually the defense seems to overcome the offense. But I don't know. Denver is such a good offense. It'll be very interesting to see. But, you don't really get the number one offense versus number one defense very often.
No, it's same even in recent memory. You don't get the number one, two best teams in the league playing in the Super Bowl in regular season. This is only the first time since 2000, or the second time, since 2000 that the number one seeds have both advanced to the Super Bowl. Only other time, ironically enough, was 2009, and I'm sure you'd rather not talk about that one, Chris, as I don't want to either. I'll just say it also involved Peyton Manning in a game against another elite quarterback. We'll just leave it at that. But Dan, what's your top storyline heading into the Super Bowl this year?
I think going back to what Chris had said earlier, I think Denver, where they're at the disadvantage right now, where 49ers weren't last week. Colin Kaepernick had the ability to get outside the pocket. That way, Seattle didn't really. The pressure was there, but Seattle really didn't have the. I would say basically, what I'm getting at is Peyton Manning. I think if he cannot get the protection on himself, where the knockdowns are limited and the pressures and everything else, I think Seattle has their way with Peyton Manning. But if their offensive line can protect them, I think that's the difference. I think Peyton Manning has time to throw. He surgically dissects that defense. But if for some reason they can't block Seattle's defense because Peyton can't get outside the box, then it's going to be a long day for him.
Agreed. Now here's some quick underlying storylines before I get into my big one. Number one, Pete Carroll tried to become the first coach since Barry Switzer to win both the national title and a Super Bowl. Switzer did it in 1996. He won the Super Bowl with the Cowboys in 96, won the national title with Oklahoma back in 1985. We also saw Jimmy Johnson do it, winning a national title with the U and then also winning it with the Cowboys. Pete Carroll tries to join that elusive company. John Fox, one of the few head coaches to lead multiple teams to the Super Bowl. He's led a team, but he led Carolina there back in 2004. Now he's leading the Broncos there in 2014, I should say, exactly 10 years later. And Peyton Manning tries to become the first quarterback, and we'll use him as the big storyline because this is the big one. Number one, Manning tries to become the first quarterback to win a Super Bowl with two different teams. We saw him win one with the Colts. He's going to try to win one with the Broncos. Hasn't happened before. But here's another stat for you gentlemen. As you know, this was probably the greatest, in terms of the season itself, the greatest season we may have seen in NFL history statistically. This, though, the telling line. If this, he wins a Super Bowl, we call this the greatest of all time. If not, does he become the next Dan Marino in 1984? Fantastic season, legendary season, no Super Bowl ring to share for it. Here's a little stat for you guys. And this is backed up with factual evidence. I've searched and researched and double researched. In the same season, quarterbacks that have broke the single season record for passing yards in a regular season have never won a Super Bowl. And here's the stats for you. Joe Namath, 1987, broke the single season passing record. He became the first 4,000-yard passer. Jets didn't make the Super Bowl. Dan Fouts in 79, 80, and 81. He broke it in 79, and then he eclipsed his own mark in 80 and 81. Chargers didn't make the Super Bowl. 84, Marino shatters these records. They get to the Super Bowl and get blown out. Manning in 04, same thing. Breaks the record, doesn't get to the Super Bowl. Brady, 07, same thing, no Super Bowl ring. Breeze in 2011, breaks Manning's record, no ring. So a quarterback has never won a Super Bowl in the same season that he's broken the all-time single-season passing yard mark. Interesting stat. Will Manning become the first? I mean, this is a guy who, being honest, has defied belief so far. I mean, he wasn't supposed to come back from this neck injury. This was supposed to derail his career. If he did come back, he wasn't going to be the same. He's come back, dare I say, better than ever. Even going back to his draft class, Chris, we're seeing news talking about this week, and I remember it very well. And, all the way back in 1998, there was some discussion that he shouldn't even be the number one overall pick, and I think every Indianapolis fan worldwide is thanking God Almighty himself or thanking whatever it is they believe in that Ryan Leaf sabotaged the draft because he did the Colts the biggest favor known to mankind. What would history have been if Irsay had gotten his way and they would have drafted Leaf? Who knows? But that's my big story right now.
It would have been a nightmare. It would have been a nightmare. I mean, one thing that most people don't realize is, that was kind of almost Ryan Leaf's own doing, as a matter of fact. They were still in debate for who they were going to pick, and they were leaning towards Manning, obviously, but they try to fly Ryan Leaf out for another discussion. He just didn't show. He was a no-show. So right there, that kind of made the decision. You're not going to show up for a meeting? Okay, ain't it is. So that guy just shot himself in the foot right there, as he did the rest of his career.
Absolutely. And I think upon reading that, I think every Indianapolis Colts fan alive probably wrote a thank you letter to the Montana State Penitentiary and sent it to Ryan Leaf because you sabotaged the draft. Thank you very kindly, my friend. Thank you very, very much. Because, frankly, since Manning got in there, the Colts have been, even since '96 when they went to the AFC title game, the Colts have been probably one of the more consistent teams. They've been one of the more consistent teams in the NFL in terms of winning. And that certainly wouldn't have been the case if Ryan Leaf would have been the pick. Speaking of, we got about 15 minutes left. Your number to call if you want to chime in, 727-441-3000 or 866-826-1340. Got a little bit of UFC to talk about. We'll break down some fights tonight. But before we get into that, we're going to talk a little bit of Major League Baseball. The New York Yankees in free agency once again strike it big. This time they give Masahiro Tanaka, Japanese pitching phenom, a 7-year deal worth $155 million. They also pay a $20 million posting fee to his team in Japan to bring him over to the United States. So the deal in all comes out to $175 million. Broken down on a season-by-season basis, he's going to make $22 million a season. This is a guy, gentlemen, who has never even so much as thrown a pitch in Major League Baseball, let alone on American soil. So, I mean, are the Yankees cunning? I mean, you look at the guy's numbers. I mean, yeah, he blew away Japanese competition, 25-0 this year with a ridiculous ERA. That's just a lot of money to give to an unproven commodity, in my opinion.
I don't know how this is all going to work out. Seems like Yankees, they never surprise me in their organization what they're going to pull off or what they're going to try to do. But I would have never put out that kind of money. And this is the thing. I mean, they're taking a gamble, but I don't know that there wasn't other people out there. They could have picked up 2 or 3 pitchers for that. We'll see how it all works out. Maybe they're going to be some kind of genius at the end of it all. But I'm selling, if you know what I mean. I'm not buying this one at all.
No, me neither. Chris, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I do understand the guy was 24-0. He had a ERA of 1.27 in the Japanese Pacific League. And I think coming in right away, he'll be interesting because people won't be used to his style, but I think they'll pick up on it. And I don't know if anybody's worth $155 million who only plays every 5th game. He's not even playing every game. I can almost understand if you're playing on a day-to-day basis. He's not. I do know they needed a number 1 pitcher very badly. I mean, CC Sebastian was one of the most hittable pitchers in the league last year. There are other Japanese, phenom, who was their number 1 pitcher, Kuroda. He was 0-7 his last 7 starts, ERA of 6.54. That was terrible. They have nothing in their farm system to speak of. I knew they really needed one, but I don't think this is the way to go. I think baseball is actually having a problem with their pay structure and whatnot. And they're kind of similar to the NBA, where if you sign this guy, I mean, a lot of that money is going to be guaranteed, and then that's their contract. I like it better myself the way the NFL does it, where if you're not producing and they don't like what you're doing, they're going to go ahead and cut your contract, and that's it. So it's very laden with bonuses, and you have to produce to make the end. Like your last year in your contract's going to be where most of the money is, and you have to produce in order to earn that money. I think the Major League Baseball needs to try and take a serious look at that, or else you're going to owe somebody millions and millions of dollars who might not even be on your roster anymore.
Absolutely, and I mean it's you look at the Yankees are facing that right now. You think they've learned their own lesson? They can't get rid of Alex Rodriguez fast enough, and they owe him $28 million this year. So I mean, it's spending isn't always the right answer, but it also, I mean, this is a telling sign, that there's the haves and then there's the have-nots in Major League Baseball. I mean, right here in town, the Rays, they just signed David Price to a 1-year, $14 million contract extension, but realistically speaking, this could be his grand hurrah. They can't pay $22 million for David Price. I mean, that's absurd. And you got to think to yourself, David Price, okay, Masahiro Tanaka coming over from Japan, playing against Quad A ball competition, because that's what I'm going to call the Japanese league. Quad A, it's not Triple A, but it's certainly not the major leagues. He got $22 million walking in the door. What's David Price going to ask for? I mean, you saw what Kershaw signed with the Dodgers. I wouldn't be surprised if Price asked for very close to that, and some team out there is going to give it to him. I mean, that's the scary reality. It's not going to be the Tampa Bay Rays. That's the simple facts. I mean, so to me, this is just an extremely
questionable move. It's a ballsy move, for lack of a better term. I'm not sure I'm crazy about it. I mean, again, $22 million. Yeah, as you said, Chris, his ERA, great. His record, great. Japanese, and for those that want to question me talking about Japanese League being quad A ball, here's a stat for you. Tuffy Rhodes hit 474 home runs in the Japanese League. He hit 13 in 6 seasons in the majors. Believe me, Masahiro Tanaka is not going to be facing Tuffy Rhodes in the big league. Mike Trout, Bryce Harper, Evan Longoria, they're not exactly, Tuffy Rhodes. These are legitimate major leaguers, and it may not pan out. If you look at their track record of success or lack thereof, especially dipping into the Japanese market for pitchers, the Yankees really are the last team I thought that would have made this gamble, because the last two they made with pitchers, Hideki Arabu, the late Hideki Arabu, and then, Kei Agawa, both those deals blew up in their faces. So
they've been terrible. I mean, to me, this shows you, why the Yankees are probably the most hated team in baseball, in my opinion, because their answer to everything is to throw more and more money on it. It's going to distort the market. They're the only ones who can pay that kind of money. It really makes me really like the other teams, the smaller markets, who can win with so much less. It's amazing how much less money they can spend and still be competitive when the Yankees can't do that with spending absorbent amounts of money.
Oh, well, I was going to say, Tampa Bay, for years has done this very well as many years ago. You look at the Marlins, those were two teams right there in the state of Florida. That are listening to this radio show, they've done it very well, and I'll tell you that sometimes that playing that team ball and people want to stay in that area because they like the fit is more beneficial. The Yankees, obviously, their spring training down there in Tampa, right down the road from my house, but it seems like the Tampa Bay Rays seem to be getting the better of them, and they've played really good team ball the last 5-6 years. So I don't think New York has any, resurgence this year into a great team, because there's so many other teams that play better baseball.
No, absolutely. Tampa, prime example, they've made the playoffs, 6 out of the last 7 seasons. And the year they missed the playoffs, they won 93 games. So they've done this with a shoestring budget. I think their payroll, and I'll get exacts on this next week, but I want to say their payroll is under $60 million. Another one, Oakland, their payroll was $40 million this year. 40, that's less than what the Yankees are paying Mark Teixeira and A-Rod, to sit on the sideline. They made the playoffs. So, that's the joy of why I like baseball. Is I'm like you, Chris. I'm like you, Dan. I like seeing with these small market teams, they have the budget constraints. They don't have free will spending, but that's where you scout. That's where you properly, build up a farm system. That proves that the farm system is king, and the Rays do it right. They made an unpopular decision last offseason by trading James Shields, but guess what? They're going to be better 5 years down the road from that, and Will Myers was pretty good this year. So, there's teams that do it, and then there's teams that spend to do it. And the spending market, the Yankees have spent over $1 billion since '98. They've won 1 World Series. That's telling stat right there. We got about 5 minutes left to go. Coming up tonight, UFC on Fox will emanate. It'll be main event of this one will be Benson Henderson versus Josh the Punk Thompson. Huge fight in terms of ramifications at the 155-pound weight class. Chris, kick us off. How do you see this fight playing out? Who do you got victorious in it?
Man, this is about as good of a fight as you're going to get for free TV. This is definitely a pay-per-view type of bout, and I'm really excited for it. I think this is a fantastic matchup. This could go a couple ways. These guys are both phenomenal fighters. The difference, I think, is going to be, I think that Thompson is going to be able to stop the takedown. And if he's able to stop the takedown, I think he wins the slugfest. I think he's a little bit better of a striker, a little bit more gritty. He can do a lot more on his feet. And, usually Ben Henderson is so good at getting people on the ground, he can just dominate in that fashion. But Thompson's a very good wrestler. If I were betting, I would have to bet on Thompson. It's a very, very close margin. So I don't see him getting taken down and held down for 3 out of 5 rounds. So I'm going to go with him on a very close decision.
Dan, what are your thoughts? Who do you see coming out with victorious in this fight?
Hey, Chris nailed it right on the head. I hate to always agree with you too, Chris, but I'll tell you, I think that if Benson Henderson goes back to his original ways and he mixes in a little bit of the Taekwondo stuff and he keeps his distance, I think he can do okay in the stand-up game with him. I think Thompson's, though, very hungry, and I think that, Thompson might have a little bit of an edge, but I guess if I have to pick somebody, I'll go ahead and pick Henderson.
You go with Henderson. See, to me,
I think Thompson's always been that good wrestler. He's always had that grittiness to him. I mean, this guy wrestled at Stanford. Obviously legitimate Division I, talent there. I think the striking element, seeing him knock out Nate Diaz, which is, happened once before back when Diaz was 19 years old. He got knocked out by Ernie Franca. But, I mean, seeing Thompson just knock Diaz flush made me, realize this kid is, this is a career revival for him. This guy is, he's caught his proverbial second win, for lack of a better term. Looking at this on paper, very evenly matched up. I think Thompson has the better wrestling, but I think Benson has the better MMA grappling, if that makes sense. Chris, you understand where I'm going with that, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
So I think Benson has the advantage in the MMA grappling side of things. Striking, I got to go with Thompson. I mean, I think Benson, Benson's a volume striker, but he's not the guy that's going to knock you out with one punch or even knock you down. He's a guy who's going to hit you many, many times and set up for his takedowns or set up for his, submission attempts or what's next. But I give the advantage of Thompson there. Really, it all comes down to me, Thompson, what's Thompson's cardio like? Because Ben can go for 5 and he can go for 10. So, I mean, that's what, to me, it's all going to come down to is he who scores last wins and he whose cardio is best wins. So, to me, it's going to be an interesting fight. I'm going to do a coin flip on this. I mean, I'm a big Josh Thompson fan. I got to save face in Arizona, especially after I mentioned the Aaron Simpson leaving fight. I'm going to pick Benson by a split decision. I gotta go with the Arizona guy in this one. It's going to be one of those ones, though, gentlemen. It won't stun me to see. If it goes the other way, I'm not going to be shocked. I mean, these are two very evenly matched guys, and point blank, both are hungry. They both want that next crack at Anthony Pettis. Benson wants a shot again against Pettis for the third time in a worse way, and Thompson, I mean, he was supposed to get the shot, so we'll see if it actually pans out and who winds up next in line. Co-main event of this one, we'll wrap it up with this. It's going to be Stipe Miocic, Gabriel Gonzaga. Real quick, Dan, who do you see winning this one?
I can't even. I don't even know. I will tell you. I think Gonzaga. He's got to win this fight. And I'll just leave it at that. He has to win this fight.
Gotcha, Chris. Who do you see winning this one?
I think Stipe just can use his movement and frustrate him, out jab him. Do the 1-2 and just be very smart. I think he wins. I think he wins the decision.
I'm going to go with Stipe as well. I'm going to go with decision. I think his boxing, his wrestling, a little too strong for Gonzaga. Gonzaga's got that ground skills. I mean, he's one of the top Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belts in the heavyweight division, but I think Stipe has a little bit more in terms of the tank.
Let me ask you this question, though. Do you think that Gonzaga is, if he loses this fight, though, do you think he still has some staying power in the UFC?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you look at what he's done since he returned to the UFC, he's, I believe, 4-1 or 5-1, and his only loss is to Travis Brown. So, I mean, I don't think he's in any preeminent danger of losing his job, but I think this is his window of opportunity to cash in and be one of the top 5 and possibly be a title contender. I mean, I think this. Yeah,
I'm not saying getting cut, but I'm talking about having any shot at getting back to the title.
Oh yeah, then this is definitely the end of the line for him. I mean, if he doesn't win the night, he's going to be basically stuck in that middle of the pack, so to speak. Which is not a bad thing, don't get me wrong, but any title aspirations go away if he doesn't win the night.
20 seconds.
The music means we are out of time. Hey, it's been a great hour, gentlemen. Thanks once again for your diligence in making Pull No Punches Radio, powered by Enlisted Knife Fight Company, such a success. Chris, Dan, have a great week. Any final comments?
Only thing I have to say is one interesting fact about the Super Bowl. I want you guys to know I've heard it being called the Weed Bowl because those are the only 2 states with legalized marijuana. They have, Washington and Colorado. Very interesting fact right there.
Kickoff time at 4:20, ladies and gentlemen. Dan, what's your final thoughts?
NBC News Radio, I'm Kristen Welker at the White House. A judge in Texas says a hospital has until Monday evening to remove life support from a pregnant woman who's been declared brain dead. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez says the hospital wouldn't disconnect Marlise Munoz because of a Texas law prohibiting doing so if the woman is pregnant.
With Munoz now 22 weeks pregnant, on Friday her family asked a court to step in, and the judge ruled in their favor, saying the state's law did not apply in this case because Munoz is dead.
The two sides in the Syrian conflict sat down at the negotiation table today in Geneva. Though both sides didn't say anything, the UN mediator did set the ground rules for future meetings. 7 people have been killed in Egypt as security forces crack down on marches by supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi. It is the anniversary of the 2011 uprising. This is NBC News Radio.
WTAN, Clearwater, Tampa Bay. WDCF, Dade City, Tampa Bay. WZHR, Zephyr Hills, Tampa Bay. Listen.
Yeah, it's time for the Saturday edition of Canada Calling, the news from home for vacationing Canadians throughout Florida. This is Prior Smith speaking from Toronto. Well, this has been one bitterly cold week across most of Canada, with overnight lows across the eastern half of the nation well below 0 Fahrenheit. And what's the outlook? More of the same every day through the middle of next week. By the way, southern Ontario got more snow overnight, more snow again this morning. That's resulted in delays, again, at the airports in Toronto. It would seem that all the ingredients were in place for the disaster that unfolded in the Quebec community of L'Île Verte near Rivière-du-Loup early Thursday morning. A senior's long-term care home, primarily made of wood, with only a partial sprinkler system, and all the inhabitants 85 years of age and older. A fire breaks out. It roars through the building. Only about a dozen people are saved. The fatality